Welcome to In Our Community. I'm your host, Vidya Pradhan, and I guess this is the new normal. This is my first show for this program on Zoom, so please excuse me, dear viewers, if I make a couple of mistakes here and there. Now, this coronavirus has upended a lot of things, but a silver lining in the gloom, at least for this show, is that we're able to bring you guests from around the country. And today's guest is very special. If you're a fan of mysteries or shows like Ancestors in the Attic or Who Do You Think You Are, buckle up and sit back for a very exciting ride. So let's meet our guest right away. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Debbie is talking to us from Florida, and she's been married to her husband, Coast Guard Commander Dan Slyker, for 50 years. She graduated from business school and as a military wife traveled extensively with her husband for 35 years, embarking on as many careers as she had moves. In addition to raising her family, working, and attending college classes, she started the hobby of constructing a family tree after her son was born 48 years ago. This was long before the availability of online search sites and DNA. In 2017, she took her first DNA test. And in 2019, amid searching DNA matches, she made a startling discovery. The man on her birth certificate was not her father. How's that for a surprise? Debbie, I'm thrilled to have you on the show today to learn about your journey tracking your father.
Thank you. I want to start by saying thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, because one thing I have learned through this journey is that thousands of people share my story. And I'm hoping that something I say or do, or somebody that sees this program, it will help them to find their story and show them how to do it.
That's great. And I'm sure our viewers are going to be excited to learn how you went about this process. But I want to know what made you decide to have a family tree at all, to create one?
Well, in 1972, my son was born, and I started thinking about all the very rich stories that my grandparents had told me and also my husband. My mother's mother was born on a mountaintop in West Virginia. She never graduated past the 8th grade, but she became a city reporter and went on to become a woman that was listed in the Who's Who of West Virginia. And my husband's grandfather was an Irish immigrant, and he was set to come over here on a ship. He was to paint the boardrooms that weren't finished in exchange for his passage. But shortly before the ship was supposed to sail, his mother had a dream that the ship would sink, and she forbade him to go. And the Irish gentlemen always listened to their mothers, and thankfully they did, because that ship was the Titanic. So I had all these wonderful stories that I had been told for years. My cousin went to Germany and researched my grandmother's entire side of the family in a book, photocopied it, sent it out to relatives, and I used that to start my family tree. I had family Bibles, I did family interviews, but when I did it then, I did it with little tiny pieces of paper that I stuck on a bigger piece of paper that I hand printed the names. And then later on, they came out.
This was 48 years ago. This was even pre-computers, right?
Well, well, there were computers, but they weren't as commercially viable as they are, where people didn't have 2 or 3 in every house back then. Right. And they had these wonderful things called floppy disks. So
that's right. I don't think many of our viewers even remember what that's like. No. So I do. I'm aging myself here.
I know. So I often had my computer crash because I uploaded so much information in my family tree, and I used a software program called Family Tree, actually. And it would crash, and then I would have to go back and re-enter everything. But it really was when I first signed up to Ancestry that the whole world of research opened up to me.
So do you have a picture of your family when you started off this journey?
Well, it was way before that. And up here, I guess Exhibit A, or Slide A, Jim, you'll see a picture of my family in the year 1952. It's Christmas. And on the left-hand side is the man I thought was my father, holding me on his lap. and then my older brother, and then that is my mother on the right, and she is holding my younger sister. And then the next slide, Jim. This is my mother. Obviously a beautiful, stunning woman. And
Yes.
so this story is just about as much about her as it is about me. And
so tell me, you did the DNA test in 2017,
right?
But you only found out in 2019 that there was something strange about your family.
Right, something very strange. Well, I had known that my father, I'm going to call him my birth certificate father, because it's different than my biological father. My birth certificate father had a half brother when his father remarried. He also remarried, and I had a half sister through that marriage. Well, I did find the half brother, and we met and we talked, and we started talking about our ancestry journey. And he said that he had taken the DNA test. And I said, "You took the DNA test?" Well, I had had the results of my DNA test, and he wasn't on it. So then I had asked my half-sister, I even called Ancestry, and I said, "There's got to be a mistake." And I'm sure that's not the first call they ever got like that. But then I asked my half-sister, and eventually she did get around to taking the test. And when the test results came out, she matched the man I thought was my half-uncle, but she didn't match me. So that's when I knew the man on my birth certificate was not my father.
Which means you and your sister had different fathers.
Right. I had my older brother and my younger sister take a test, and my older brother came back that he did indeed have the father that I thought was my birth certificate father, and the one in the picture. And then my younger sister came back, and he came back as a half brother, and my younger sister came back as a full sister. So
to him,
to the unknown father. So we shared the same unknown biological father, and it was I'm 69, she's 67. It was all our lives, never ever had a clue, never had a clue.
So explain this again, just to make it clear. So you have 3 siblings.
Yes.
And how are each of you related to the man you thought was your father?
My brother is his son. His mother was my mother, and his father was the birth certificate father. My younger sister and I share the same mother and the same biological unknown father.
When you found this out, what kind of a ripple did it create in the family? What was the reaction?
Well, we went through all the different stages of grief, because first of all, we were shocked, and my sister and I both went straight into denial. I mean, we couldn't believe it. We knew our mother. Our mother would never have a 2-year affair with a man while she was married to our father. I mean, so, and my half-sister by my birth certificate's father's second marriage, she was very upset because I'm her godmother to her child, and we've been very close. And she said, "I'm not your sister anymore." And I said, "You are my sister. You will always be my sister. You may not have a biological tie to me, but you are my sister." And so we went through all these stages. I mean, frustration, overwhelmed with information, not enough information, and depression. It's kind of like you found a person and you lost them in the same moment.
Did you, at this time, were your parents alive for them to be asked these questions, or this was after they had passed?
Well, presumably my father has passed. If my research is correct, they have, and my mother passed, and she took.
But your birth certificate father had passed by that time.
And also, yes.
Okay.
All parties concerned. I even looked for my mother's best friend, because I thought if anybody would know a secret, it would be your mother's best friend. And she had passed also. So I found out really too late.
So once when the DNA result came out and you said you were in denial, what did you do next?
Well, let's see. Can you pull up slide B?
Slide B. Okay.
Right,
Yes.
slide B. So what you're looking at is when the DNA is analyzed and it comes back, they match up everybody that you have a DNA matched to on both the maternal and paternal side. So I knew some of my relatives for sure on my mother's side. So what you can do on Ancestry and other programs too, but I use Ancestry, so that's what I'm going to talk about. So on this one, you'll see to the left, you'll see a pink or a blue that indicates male or female. Sometimes they have their pictures up there, sometimes they don't. And then I've blocked out last names. I'm trying to ensure privacy as much as possible during this process. So the first two people, you'll see it gives you the designation, this is a parent or a child, and those first two people, Deirdre and Daniel, are my children. And if you look at their DNA, you will see that they have inherited approximately 50% of my DNA. Then over to the right, and you'll see that there is a column, and it has a star and a little pink dot and some notes, and it says our daughter. So what I did then was going down, the next person after my son is my sister Susan, and it shows her as a full sister. And then the next segment, it says close family. The first one is one of my grandsons, and then below that is my half brother. So it's just, they don't get exactly the 25% or 50% of the DNA, they get approximately. And then the next three are my some of my other grandchildren that I have tested. So if you go to the right, you'll see that they share 3,000, my daughter shares 3,466 CMs, and that's an abbreviation for centimorgan. And a centimorgan is just a measurement of how closely you are related to that person, like an inch would be on a yardstick. So this shows by that number, the bigger the number, the closer the relationship. And then there's also other features where you can group them. So what I did, one of the features that they have is that you can take one of your matches. So I picked somebody that I knew was for sure my match in my mother's side of the family. Mm-hmm. And I clicked on the option of shared matches. And then what that does is that brings up everybody in those shared matches that is on your mother's side. So I started color coding those so that I could identify which ones weren't from my mother's side of the family.
So basically you decided that this is science, and even if I don't like the results, it is what it is, and I can't disbelieve it.
Right.
Were you able to, I know you've done your research, but were you able to convince your family that this was the truth?
In steps. The more information I was able to learn and pass on, the more I think I convinced them. Some people that I encountered didn't take any convincing. Some people won't even talk to me. My sister took a little convincing, but she's on board, and she did the same thing. She didn't want to believe what our mother might have done. So when I started matching them up, and then if you could show the next slide, which would be slide C. Okay, this shows the next grouping of matches. Now, these were people I had no idea who they were. These were on my father's side of the biological chart, and I really didn't know who they were. So I started grouping them, and of course, the highest number, I was able to message a person who handled this particular account, and they pushed me in the right direction. And then once I had figured out who they were, then I had to decide what was the last known relative, that the highest part of the relative chart that I could, or ancestry chart, where I could find somebody. So I know for sure, and I don't know if you want to get into this or not, because of some of the matches, that the familiar matches would go back to my second great grandparents. From my second great grandparents, William and Nancy, up, I know my ancestry. But I had to figure out that which one of their children or grandchildren or great grandchildren would be my father.
So how were you able to explain this again? How were you able to track that far back, but not that close? You know, you've managed to find someone several generations ago, but you haven't been able to find just the previous generation. How did that happen?
That, I think, is the most interesting part of the journey. First of all, I am not a genealogist. I started out complete novice, and I'm not sure at what point you become an expert, but I'm not quite there yet. So every day I study more about the science. But I know for sure, and I watch it. There's a popular TV show, you mentioned a few of them, but Genetic Detective. And I watch CC Moore, and she is really great about giving tips on how to do things. And also there are a lot of groups online, support groups for people who've had a non-paternity event, NPE they call it, that's what I am. And so they kind of tell you how to do it. So what I did was I had to first find the common relative ancestor to the people that I had matched on DNA. And that was a long process. That took several months. And when I just found that it was William and Nancy, and you can tell that by the centimorgans, there's a chart on that too, we'll look at in a while.
But let me just interrupt here for a quick clarification. How many people had to be tested before you found that an ancestor that far back? And where did you get your results from? Because I'm sure there was no DNA testing back then. So how did you get to that name?
They would be familiar matches, and I had to find the people that they matched and work my way up to where I found the common one to all of the DNA matches that I knew. They have trees built on Ancestry and other places, and you find the person and you climb to their top of their tree so you can look out, and you find the common ancestor. From these two people came all of these DNA matches that I had listed in my match profile.
But I'm thinking that some of it has to be non-DNA records as well.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You have, most of the DNA sites have an enormous amount of research available, documents. I mean, there are plenty of documents that you don't ever have to go online to get. If you feel like traveling to your library, they usually have genealogy departments and newspaper articles and stuff. But when I got on Ancestry, the footwork stopped pretty much. I still have to do some things, but I was able to access records that people had posted, public records. Ancestry actually purchased records from several organizations, the Quakers, the Mormons. So they had a lot of information. So it was really like a giant puzzle. If you think of a puzzle, I put this piece here and this piece here and this piece here. And when I put in initially the last piece, I found the border of the puzzle. So then I had to fill it in.
So before you did the DNA test, you had already embarked on this whole journey of finding out your family tree. So you must have already filled in a lot of the gaps through other records, family lore, family history.
Right.
What are some of the other records that you used to fill in before you hit the DNA?
Right. Well, I used Ancestry because I was 3 years after I started that I did that. I had family Bibles. When I started doing this, my family members who didn't want to bother with all of the records that they were holding on to, they were getting up in age, and they really didn't want to bother with them. So I became the custodian of all the records. So I would go through them. But the thing that I did find out in doing all this research is people misremember people lie. The DNA doesn't lie.
So when this, of course, the biggest revelation was about your father, but
Yes.
when you compared what the results you got out of Ancestry with the results you got out of your own legwork, did they match up?
On my mother's side, my father's side was completely wrong.
Right.
Although, as I think I told you this, I did find some connections between my birth certificate father and my biological father, and even my mother's father. So there was some crossover DNA from different people back in the 1700s. So when I came up with this map after building up to the starting point, then I had to build down. And that's where I had to start eliminating people for various reasons to see who my father might have been. There's a lot of things to take into consideration. Obviously, I don't have his DNA kit. So he never had his DNA done. And so I had to do some detective work.
So we have a whole separate segment that we're going to do on the actual search for Debbie's father. So I'm going to just end this particular session with an important question. I think that you may have been asked many times, that knowing what you do now, would you do the same thing again?
I would. I don't even want to say I'm even hesitating about it, because I think the truth is more important than anything. I'm a 6-time cancer survivor. So in addition to knowing my ethnicity, my biological parents, half my health history is wrong. I've had to call my doctors and say, you know how that information I filled out on my father, you can scratch it. Well, what is the new information? I don't know. I have no idea. So.
And not just for you, for the members of all your siblings as well. You
Right.
know,
And my grandchildren and my children.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
It did create a lot of emotional upheaval, though.
Yes.
And how has the family dealt with that?
Well, I think, like anything, when you first hear about something like this, you go through a process. And my sister and I are pretty good. Actually, my children and my grandchildren were kind of excited about it. I'm not sure why. I think they found out that my mother was a lot more exciting than they thought.
Do they have memories of her?
I'm sorry?
Do they have memories of?
Some of the older ones do, but not the younger ones, but only through tales that we tell. I think that was hardest for my sister and I. And of course, my older brother, I mean, he went from full brother status to half brother, and then my half sister went from half sister to no sister. So, I mean, it's a process. You have to think through it, and you have to decide, am I just going to sit around and be gloom and complain and whine about it, or are you going to get busy and find out who it was? And
also perhaps it's led to a reevaluation of what family means, right? Because I mean, the biological component is useful for history, medical history, and other things like that. But after all, family is made up of shared memories and relationships built by two human beings, and in a way.
Yeah. And my the man I thought was my birth certificate father left when I was 5, and my sister was 3. So it wasn't like we had this real close relationship anyway. So I kept touching base with him, but he kept disappearing. He was an alcoholic, and he was not a good working person. And he was kind of a vagabond, and he would travel from person to person. He did marry 4 times. And so I would try to catch up with him just to keep in touch with him. I know for sure he didn't know. I can say that because.
How do you say that? Mm-hmm.
Well, he left me his life insurance to share with his 5 siblings, his 5 children, and he paid child support. I don't think he would have paid my mom, didn't pay a lot of child support, but I don't think he would have paid my mother child support had he known that we weren't his children.
Okay, so I'm going to end this segment at this point. I do realize, viewers, that all you've heard this so far is the process. And in our next segment, we're actually going to talk details and all about Debbie's search for her father in much more detail, and with some information on what the discoveries were along the line, what were the steps taken towards the discovery, and what the result was. So you've been listening to In Our Community. I'm your host, Vidya Pradhan, here with Debby Slyker. And in our next segment, we'll be talking more about Debbie's search for her father. Goodbye.